Yeah, so we're gonna end the day on soft skills. So if you can imagine a container, on the outside is the soft skills, and on the inside is hard skills. I tried to bring it together, but of course, yes, people management, but also organizational design. And to me, facilitation is probably one of the most important things out of the many soft skills that there are out there. And so today we're gonna kind of go over these 5 areas. I'm gonna give you all an overview and just sort of level set on the terms and the current context of the world today. Then we'll talk about what is an inclusive environment. We'll talk about sort of ways to facilitate and make it easy where all of you all can apply this tomorrow. And I've got some resources for you all to take with you as well. And kind of following all of the pretext, I'll talk about my learnings and what we're looking forward to. And so why feedback? Feedback plays a vital role in terms of how we can deliver innovative solutions, support growth, and transformation. It sounds like a lot of corporate speak, but this is actually a pretty loaded sentence. For me, when I start thinking about how we can really level up our teams, building innovative solutions, I think really collaboration is key to that. Feedback plays a really important role for us to really sort of expand the horizon and understand the use cases that we may not be thinking of and build something that is truly, really ahead in the market. In terms of supporting growth, the better that we get at really articulating our decisions, right? The more aware that we are, the more that our head is on a swivel, the more we have opportunities to really stretch ourselves and, of course, learn and grow from that. And then on that last piece, it's transformation. All these things play a really important role in terms of us really being our best and moving ahead and moving into leadership positions. I truly believe that even though a lot of us in the room are individual contributors, we all play lead in some way, shape, or form. And so how can we really build upon that to influence strategy? So I'll give you all a quick introduction about myself. As Vili said, my name is Harrison Wheeler. I am a product design director at LinkedIn, and I lead a team of around 40 designers and managers on our LinkedIn ads platform. So, one of the interesting things about LinkedIn is that even though we are 20 years old, we are close to 1 billion users. We're seeing an even larger sort of uptick in terms of daily active users. And so we're seeing a lot of maturity. Also, the problem spaces that we are faced with is a lot of legacy, while also making sure that we are building tools that meet the market and are ahead of the market as well. On top of that, previously to LinkedIn, I was at a startup company where I built a design team from 0 to 1. And so again, a lot of this is really going to be about my journey, thinking about how we build teams, how we recruit teams, how we work with our cross-functional partners. And on top of that, I love community. And so what you see from here, you see, photos from sort of my past teams, my current teams, as well as an opportunity to sort of meet with folks in the community. And obviously, I'm here right now to be able to meet with you all. There's really 2 things that I'm really passionate about. So number 1, it's really making sense out of chaos. And it sounds a little bit like a toxic trait, but we live in a very complex world with a ton of nuance. And so it's important that we are cognizant of that. And then on the second piece is how do we build organizations that scale that are really helping us do our best work. And so you'll get a little bit of that in this presentation. But I want to start with where things are at today. And context is really key. I'm not going to get into the whole remote work world, but I do think it's important to just understand how, the 33% difference in terms of workers that are in a remote or hybrid setting. And I think a lot of us really look at this in terms of a huge transformation in the way that we work. But we're also seeing more folks sort of moving back into the office. But the thing is that even though we are starting to kind of think about this remote hybrid work, it's here to stay, there's still things that are constant. There's still constant things that we need to improve on. Number 1, there's no silver bullet for communication, right? We know that there's a ton of tools that are coming out, and we've seen some of that today. There's a lot of change management that has to come with that as well. And additionally, right, a lot of organizations, due to the macroeconomic climate, have to do more with less. And so, keeping these things in mind, it's really key for us to maybe sort of think about, like, should we disrupt the way that we work? Another thing here is that despite the remote sort of hybrid approach, we're still dealing with distributed teams. And so I have teams that are located in about 3 different continents across 7 time zones. And so there's a lot of challenges that come with that. One of the things that I really like to, one of the biggest challenges out of here, there are 2 challenges, right? Number one is, like, how do we maintain a strong design culture at scale? Because people are remote, people have different sort of cultural context. There's different social events that happen in the world that affect the way that people show up. And the second challenge is, how do we accelerate the speed of feedback and response? And in terms of the second challenge, it's not necessarily for us to be moving a lot faster and being a production house. But I think one of the biggest challenges of having folks distributed is that signals kind of get lost in time. When you've got folks working in different time zones, if we're not providing feedback early and often, you've got 1 day that goes by, you have 2 days that go by. And time is extremely valuable. Valuable in many different ways, right? Because I know the last thing any of you all like to do is sit in meetings that don't have any value. FYI, 90% of my day is sitting in meetings. So there's really kind of 2 things here that, when kind of faced with these challenges, that really need to remain at top of mind. Number one, we want to be goal-oriented. So everything we want to do it well. And I know that's exactly what everyone in this room wants to do. Otherwise, you would not be at this conference, right? Getting these different perspectives, taking some of that home, and figuring out how you can provide value where you all work. And I think for me, I want to make sure that our team is doing their best work and that our product is one of the best in the markets. And the second piece here is having an outcome-driven approach. Everyone where you all work, whatever you're building, it's there for a purpose. And so everything else that we do within our organization should cascade to that. Either it's leveling up from a bottoms up, or we have to sort of consider maybe if there's top-down directives. And so everything that we do has some sort of business outcome to it. One of the kind of high-level frameworks that I really like to talk about is sort of an adaptation of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And Jose kind of talked about this yesterday. I think fundamentally to everything is time, right? If you don't have time, it's going to be hard to grow, right? You're just producing things. You don't really have opportunity to sort of upskill your craft. And I think coming at a close second is understanding and alignment. And that's primary research. Secondary research is understanding, really how to synthesize that information, understanding the methods and frameworks, but also knowing when to apply them. Again, there's so many of those, but I think for the sake of this conversation, we're going to focus on the feedback, because feedback and time play a really close relationship. And you can imagine if you are in a situation where the environment isn't safe for that, it's going to work its way to the users, right? And so it's important that we really sort of take our time and also make sure that we are in an environment that can provide us with that sort of context setting. So, building inclusive environments. I've had this icebreaker question happen in many different circumstances with close friends. I have my podcast. I've asked this to guests. But if you were to ask me for many years, I probably would avoid the question and dodge it. But I think particularly in the context of this presentation, there's really a moment that resonates with me. And it was really fairly early in my career in product design. Up until 2013, a lot of the work that I did was on the web. I started coding when I was about 12 years old. And moving into user experience design was different, right? I wasn't working with freelance clients. I didn't really understand the jargon. I knew the concepts, but the jargon was a little bit different. And firstly, I was also working with an in-house design team or engineering team, but that engineering team was in a whole other time zone with so many different, different approaches in terms of how they communicated. And it was my first big project. And I remember walking into the office, and I was like, this is a really interesting vibe because none of the designers talk to each other. And so I really kind of found myself in my own world trying to figure out how to do things. It was very hard to sort of approach people and ask for feedback. And it was a very isolating experience. And I churned on this project for about 2-3 weeks, and eventually it was time to present to our leadership team. And I just got grilled. It was a very uncomfortable experience, and I felt extremely blindsided. And on top of that, I just felt that I couldn't do my best, even though I had the best intentions. I also think in terms of that environment, the folks that were giving me the critique, they didn't have bad intentions, but again, when time is going by and expectations aren't met, sometimes frustration and communication mishaps can happen. But look, I'll tell you this, when we start talking about inclusive organizations, there's nothing but benefits behind it. One of the earlier talks was around, designing systems of harm. And, I think one of the thoughts that was brought up was around building diverse teams. And I think building diverse teams is extremely important, but there's a lot of work that needs to happen to make sure that those folks are in environments where they can thrive. And we really have to work hard at that, right? Each and every single one of you all need to understand how you all have an impact on these environments. And there's a great business case for it, right? We see that there's a benefit in terms of the types of ideas that go to market. We see that there's a benefit in terms of retention and people staying on teams. And then we also see an uptick in terms of collaboration. So this is good for business. And so this is why I really think this is a soft skill we should all be investing in. But it takes practice, right? It takes habit forming. And we'll go into some of that. So what goes into building these environments? Number one, inclusive environments reduce personal bias, okay? And let me break that down for you. It's really important to build constructive environments, and I think a good way to start is to really sort of leverage things that are already there. All of you are working in organizations where everyone, regardless of your discipline, you sign a contract to really empower the business, right, and build towards that business. And so, leverage product principles, leverage mission statements. I know we all have our own tastes, but it's really important to make sure that we're sort of really leveraging those, and that's a good first step. Number two, making sure that everyone has an opportunity to participate, and being cognizant that people have different ways and modes and forms of communicating. And then that third piece that I think is really important is deliver value for those that are participating. And so, again, this is kind of like what I talked about before. What is that desired outcome? And really being super clear and crisp about that. All right, so I can't reiterate this enough. We have to put in work. It's going to take some time, but I think the benefit of this is that a good place to start is creating definitions in terms of the different types of feedback. And so we did this about 1.5 years ago, and we really sort of set out with 4 different types of feedback. One around review, one around generative thinking, one around FYI, which is giving people an idea of what's happening in the industry, or maybe there is a product feature that's coming down the line, but there may not be resources aligned to it. And then another sort of feedback format is around our retrospectives. In terms of our weekly schedule, this is sort of also a way that we've sort of implemented this in our schedule. And so we usually start out with a weekly design stand-up, and that's just an opportunity for designers to connect. And we put that at a time zone-friendly time. We'll have a cross-functional design jam, and that's when we may have product leaders, engineering leaders, product marketing folks there. We'll then have our weekly design review. Some people call that critique. We'll then have our product strategy review where I might be in that meeting going to leadership and talking through some of the work that the team is doing. And so it's really important to show this because it's different levels in terms of feedback and where they're laddering up. And there's also different outcomes for those meetings as well. And so I like to visualize this. Not saying that everyone uses the double diamond, but I think this is a good diagram to at least allow people to kind of grok pretty easily. With all these different types of review formats, you can almost see that working across the product development lifecycle. And so there's really many opportunities to mix and match these different methods to your benefit and to your value. Ultimately, we want to make sure that everyone has an opportunity to do that throughout. And I think the purpose here is that we also want people to meet early and often, because all of these things create a really great cycle and flywheel of feedback, response, and action. So all of the different types of feedback channels that I communicated to you earlier all really play a role in this iterative process, right? We're always iterating, and it allows us to be a lot more flexible as an organization. And of course, this should be pretty apparent to most folks. We have our real-time channels and our asynchronous channels. Again, it's really important to be able to really define these things because people just need to know that they're there. And sometimes ideas might come up where we're not all able to meet at the same time. It also allows us to sort of add structure at these many different feedback points, right? Around feature prioritization, resource discussion, roadblocks, and workshops. So this is not an exhaustive list, but you can also imagine where really kind of facilitating feedback can play a really big role. All right, so now let's see what this might look like, right? And these are the pieces I think that this will help you sort of implement some of these things tomorrow. One of the tools that we've really adopted is a tool called FigJam. I'm sure all of you are familiar with it. It's in Figma. But these different types of methods can also work in tools like Miro or Google Slides. So there's a lot of flexibility to how these things work. But you can imagine a critique workspace might look like this. And so what our teams do, they will actually take their design mockups and bring them over into FigJam. And the benefit of this is because it allows teams to really kind of focus on the design at hand versus going into an active Figma workstream. And we really try to make sure that we are really focused in terms of the screens that they're presenting. A generative workspace might look something like this. So we have our participants, they have their own space, and so you can imagine this is a crazy 8 exercise. The reason that we do this is it allows designers that might be early on in the process, if they need a little bit of help of coming up with new ideas, they can leverage the team. And then we have our FYI workspace. And so if there's a new idea out there, we can go and the designer will present on this, and at the same time, the team will contribute to this. We have a few light sort of prompts here around questions, ideas, and things to consider. And then finally, we have our retro workspace. And I know many of you all are familiar with running retrospectives, so really asking what worked, what didn't, what can be improved, and optionally, you can give kudos. So this is my gift to you all. These templates are actually available in the Figma community. You all can actually download those today. I've had over 500 downloads on this. And the feedback's been really great for people that have been trying to start this type of work in this collaborative environment in their organization. So be sure to check that out. All right, so we talked about inclusive environments. Now let's talk about how do we facilitate it. Again, facilitation is one of those things that we really need to put into practice. And one thing to note is that you're not the star of the show. You are that trusted teammate that is really encouraging your folks to be a better outcome there. And so there's really sort of 3 things. We keep it simple. There's really 3 things that you're responsible for as a facilitator. To time keep, to enforce the rules of engagement, and to have some situational awareness. I like to call that a vibe check. And so here's a few scenarios when it comes to timekeeping, right? Pretty straightforward, right? Keeping a time limit in terms of how much time someone can present, because we don't want one person taking over the whole 30 minutes of a session, for example. Making sure that every participant has an opportunity to speak. If anyone goes over their time in terms of giving feedback, then stopping them and going to the next person. Or maybe you might encourage people that are giving that feedback to only focus on, the most salient bits. So one of the things that we generally tend to do, we say, give us, 2 to 3 examples that you want to communicate. When it comes to enforcing rules of engagement, I've generally found that once you build trust in the team and you do this over time, it's not as hard as it seems. And so really encouraging active listening. I think, again, I like to go back to the contract. As a participant, you're giving feedback, but there's going to be a point in time where you want feedback on your work, and you would want people listening and having their full undivided attention on you. Obviously the cell phones, we don't want that happening. Limiting the side chatter and making sure that people don't speak over each other. That's one of the most contagious things that I've seen. So, if one person sees something interrupting, other people might interrupt other people to have their chance to speak, and we don't want to do that. And then finally, we want to make sure that, we have that vibe check. And so, again, this is really sort of reading the room, extending the time if, maybe ideas are a little bit slower. See who's engaged and who isn't, and maybe sort of calling them. And if there's something that may not be clear, if there's like a little bit of silence in the room, asking them if you were, what you communicated was clear. I have another bonus resource for you all to also sort of to utilize, and I released this back in April, but it's called Facilitator for FigJam. And one of the pieces that about this feedback piece is we actually have led we've created multiple sessions where we've had non-design folks leading Figma workshops. And so what this does, this allows that facilitator to see everyone who is participating, how many stickies they've contributed, and if they've actually moved past their turn, they can actually check them off like a task list. So this is another cool tool to help facilitate that. All right. So now let's go into learnings. And so you can almost kind of think about this as like about a year pilot that we did on our team. I love kind of going through this period because off the learnings, you can then iterate. And we saw a lot of value out of this. So high level, right, takeaways, facilitation is something that everyone can unlock. Every designer on our team implemented this not only in their areas, but they were also able to do it in their outside eng and product collaborations. Clear definitions set expectations, so people were in the right mindset to give the right feedback and the relevant feedback. And good habits are contagious. So this wasn't anything that was necessarily prompted for some designers. They just did it in their own sort of their own working groups. And so how has this transformed the way that we work? So, again, I talk about the growth piece, and there's really kind of 3 pieces here in terms of like the work that I presented. So, number 1, contextual, actionable documentation. And so having sticky notes in contextually relevant places allowed people to act on them a lot faster without necessarily needing to come back and needing to clarify. Number 2, having these types of feedback sessions also improved the articulation of design decisions. You don't want somebody just going in and designing something without understanding the why behind it. We do a lot of work. We've done a lot of work in terms of research and defining jobs to be done that are relevant. So a ton of resources where it makes it easier for our team to really be able to articulate. And then on the third piece, right, it created confidence and buy-in from stakeholders. And so, having this type of forum and this interactive method really kind of breaks the norm of just like sitting in a meeting and going through a long Google documentation. And so looking forward, we've evolved this quite a bit. And for all of you all, just remember, if you all implement some of this in your organizations today, just know that it's contextual to your organization. Feel free to sort of change how you fit and add it to your process. But I think one of the things here that I was really mindful of is that when we think about habits, we generally tend to think about those from an individual level. I think the real challenge is actually really transforming a whole organization and doing it at scale. And so we did have some limitations of getting in larger and larger groups that may not have had as much context about the product space or the problem space. And so what we ended up doing, we ended up aligning designers to different product strategy areas. And so I'll give you an example. I have about 5 businesses under my organization. And so what we ended up doing, we ended up splitting designers into those different sort of groups. And that allowed them to really think and understand deeply about the users and the specific use cases in those product areas. Smaller pods, we also saw that they created faster feedback cycles. And so this provided a little bit more autonomy where there wasn't a centralized decision-making process. And so designers would work with their engineering partners and really sort of come up with ideas that really helped them move forward faster. And then we also empowered our senior cross-functional leads to really sort of own the strategy. Autonomy is great, but I think it also needs to have a focus and be able to ladder up to the broader strategy. And so let me give you an example of what that looks like. This is a simple diagram. So what you can kind of see here, what I've talked about, we have these different strategic initiatives. And those strategic initiatives really feed into that business area. But I think the really big challenge here is like, how do we create narratives and how do we create a cohesive experience and a consistent experience? So we were talking about design systems, for example, or we're talking about accessibility. This is where a lot of these things start to come into play from a conversational perspective. And so we're still working on this. We actually did a pilot of this last quarter, and it's really created an environment where people are just sharing unprompted, and we're starting to see more people come up with new ideas that are unprompted. So these things really can ladder up to a broader strategic level. But I just kind of want to close with a few things here, right? So number one, small habits can be transformative and shape organizational culture. Organizational culture has a way of finding itself in our products, right? And so again, that's why I say the soft skills are so important, because the decisions that we make, how we work every single day, our users are likely going to see that. And you all have an opportunity to be a multiplier by committing to put in the work. I think all of you all have an opportunity to really improve your working environment and really helping facilitate a lot of these discussions. Because habits shape your identity, and your identity shapes your habits. And so, how do you want to be seen in the world? Do you want to build the best product out there? Then we've got to build better habits to get us there. And so, what advice would I give my younger self? I want to be the dependable teammate that I wish I had, right? And so with that, thank you so much. I'm curious to hear what your organizational things are, what's happening in your organization, and are there opportunities to improve that? But I also want to challenge you to also think about what advice would you give your younger self. There could be an opportunity for you to implement that in your organization. You can reach me on Twitter, you can reach me on Instagram, and of course, my favorite website, LinkedIn. And I have a podcast called Technically Speaking. You can find that on anywhere you listen to podcasts, and that's where I talk to a ton of design practitioners, entrepreneurs, around the industry, and we talk about organizational dynamics quite a bit, but also about some of the struggles that they went through and understanding how they got out of it. context matters. And so just know that you're empowered to make the change. Thank you.
Harrison, thank you so much. All right, we have a couple of questions in here, so I'm going to drop in. Actually, one person was really active in kind of posting questions all the time, so that's Sasha, and I believe that's you, Sasha. So here we go. That's for your wonderful effort. Thank you so much. Like, so many questions. It's like, I can't keep up. You know, I spent, I think, like 20 hours writing down questions for speakers, and then Sasha writes 3 for each speaker. And I don't get to bring up mine. All right. So, question from Sasha. In my team, we had one complaint over and over again in retros. I can also show it to you. In retros, that was accepted by the blamed party, but simply never got better. So it went in circles until people stopped bringing it up, since it won't get better anyway. So how do you solve something like this?
Oh, that's a good one. You know, I think the real question is, like, after those retros, were there any actionable sort of steps? And you know, a lot of times when things are happening through repetition, that's usually a good sign that it should be addressed. You know, one of the things when I have designers that are working with new teams that haven't necessarily worked with a designer before, one of the first things that we do is a retro, because it's a good opportunity to sort of get a sort of baseline where things are at. And there's a lot of uncomfortable conversations there. Well, but retrospectives, in my opinion, are one of the most effective things. But it's just like if you go to therapy, right? If you're not like putting it out, like challenging uncomfortable things, it will never be addressed. And so, you know, as I say, being that trusted teammate, it might be worthwhile to maybe put it upon yourself to sort of present that as an actionable item. And you know, one of the things that I also like to do is assign a lead to it. Because I think if you say, hey, we need to do this, you may not see any action from it. And so I think having somebody that owns it and having a follow-up on that as an action item, maybe you all are doing weekly stand-ups, that could be a good opportunity to also sort of see what the progress is there.
Lilia chose to use Comic Sans for the question. What are some tips you might have when things get very heated and highly emotional, especially when there is a sore spot between teams?
Yeah, good question. Look, I mean, I don't think I necessarily said this in the presentation. Usually when there are points of contention, that is a point of decision, and it has to be confronted. It just has to. It really depends, right? Like I talked about constructive sort of feedback. I think the moment you start going into personal attacks, it's just not going to work out, right? Like the person on the other side they're gonna not feel great. Like if I said something about you, I don't think you would find that nice. And so, you know, I think it's really important for us to put ourselves in other people's shoes. And so it might be an opportunity again to just sort of level set and really say, okay, look, we're both in this together. We both want to find a solution to this, you know, and we all have our different motivations, but I think it's important to lay that out there. Yeah. The last thing you should do is go to your manager about a conflict, because that's only going to exacerbate the situation. So it's really important for us to gather that courage and have that discussion.
Yeah, I think one of the issues that actually helped me is to, like sometimes we often, often we feel like we need to go in a meeting with action points in the end. Yeah. And sometimes it feels like just a matter of bringing up something in a discussion and having maybe different opinions on that, right? Yeah. Maybe not necessarily finding a common ground, but at least having, you know, at least bringing this up, and so both parties agree that, okay, this is something that needs to be worked on, and maybe have a follow-up call or anything that you can actually discuss and how to tackle this. Yeah. I think it's not necessarily that you really have to figure out, like, these are the action points we're going to take this time, right now, to solve this. Sometimes it's just too hard to find a solution.
Yeah, and I like that, right? So the reason you got to that point is because you've been in those discussions. Yeah. You know that every single time you may not have an outcome, but you're broaching the topic. Yeah. Right.
And it's kind of a journey, right?
Exactly. So you know, I think it's again, it's a practice. Like it's not easy, but this is how we build high functioning teams. That's how you build trust. And that's how you get out on the other side.
Lukni is wondering, sometimes it's a bit tricky to facilitate feedback when there is no data involved, as every member or sub-team have their own perspectives. How do we tackle that situation?
Oh, good question. And I almost kind of would want to understand, it really kind of depends on where you're at in the process. Like that's actually a pretty difficult question to kind of answer. But what I can say here, I think understanding early on what the outcome that you're optimizing for. Like there's usually going to be data around that. And so for instance, like one of the things that we do, we've done a lot of like high level research. And I almost kind of want to frame that. We don't have a huge research team, and we're pretty limited in resources. And so what we generally tend to do, we have a lot of foundational research. And so that foundational research isn't necessarily tied to a single initiative. And so what we can do, we can actually leverage a lot of those jobs that have come out of that research. And so what I would do is maybe like, I think it's really difficult. If you're trying to grab individual bits of data, you can easily augment that. Mm-hmm. And so I think it's really important to maybe sort of think about like, is there like just a key sort of North Star here? And I think from an experiential perspective, it's always important to really kind of key in on one or two of those because you can have a ton of different points of data, right? Like we have latent data, we have things that may come a little bit later, and things that we just don't really track, right? Every organization doesn't track every single thing, mm-hmm. And so I think it's really important maybe early on to just sort of make sure that you've identified where that is, and then also too, one thing to flag is like have that person. Have you actually included them in the process? Because I've generally found if people are not included in the process, especially early on, they're likely going to be detractors because they're not feeling heard.
Yeah.
And so, that's why I'm saying like, make sure that everyone early on is in. Another common thing is like, we will do workshops just to make sure that people have their ideas because everyone in the room has a different experience. Everyone in the room, like we talk about, has those diverse experiences that they value and they want to contribute. And so maybe think about like, did you have that opportunity early on for them to contribute?
Yeah, I think also one thing that really worked well for me is to always, whenever I try to kind of make a decision with a particular team, because usually I'm working with design teams or conception teams, and it often feels like, okay, we're making a decision now, but then hold on, before we just making that decision, let's just bring up developers and PM and maybe let's just have one more call. It's not urgent. It's not like we have to make a decision now.
Right.
That's what we kind of feel like. But hold on, just before we just nail it and move on in that direction, let's just have another call tomorrow, the day after tomorrow, like 20 minutes or so to get that feedback. And I think like very often we feel maybe that feedback has this negative connotation.
Yeah.
But it doesn't really have to.
No.
Right? And actually what you're saying also about decision-making process kind of really builds up on a question that Kate has brought up as well. Product design is a big responsibility with a lot of decisions to be made.
Yeah.
What could a young engineer start with to integrate in some way into the decision-making process?
Yeah, we can't wait until handoffs, right? Like, I don't like the concept of handoffs, right? Because the idea here is that design has come up with all the decisions, and they figured out all the edge cases, and they've done all the testing, when that's really not the case, right? So I think like, kind of working on this definition right now, we're looking at sort of different fidelities in terms of, we call it percentages. And so, if you can get into a point where even there's low fidelity designs just to be in a critique, that is a really great way to sort of understand preemptively, here are some things to consider, right? And I think having the language about here's the things to consider versus what we can't do or here are the limits is a great exercise, like, that improv exercise, yes and. I think that's a really great exercise, right? Because you're saying, you know what, here's some things to consider. There could be ways to solve that with design and collaboration with engineering, right? But if you wait to the last minute and you're holding it really close, now we're going to have to start talking about what are things that we're cutting, and then we have to go back to the drawing board and really understanding at this point, if we're cutting all of these things, are we still delivering the value that we set out to give to our customers?
Right. And the final one that also came up here, how do I make sure that people have really said their piece? Sometimes I think there might be something missing, and I think that somebody has an opinion, but I can't really force anyone to give their feedback either.
Setting expectations, right? I think setting expectations in terms of saying, this is the moment for us to give that feedback, or this is your moment to say your piece. Because everyone else can now hold everyone in that room accountable, right? Accountability is so key, and having clear definitions and level setting, yes, it might be a little bit of extra effort, but that saves you a ton of time later on.
Okay. And the final question, which it might be a little bit off topic, but I guess it must have, it had to come up. How do I get more page views on LinkedIn?
So look, I have to commend you, Vili, just post more content, right? You've been doing a lot of really great work, and a lot of people have seen value on it. We've been investing a lot in terms of creators on our platform and more tools to understand how people are interacting with your profile. And so I would encourage people to post more. I know it can be a little bit intimidating, but I'll give you all a great example. For so long, I was actually really hesitant to post on LinkedIn. I had written all these articles, and I didn't feel like it was good enough. And one day I got the courage to start sharing more articles, and it really is sort of like this flywheel, because when you post more content, you get noticed, and in true LinkedIn fashion, you might get more job opportunities. You might get opportunities to speak. You might get opportunities to collaborate with people that you didn't think before. You may even have some of your own design heroes that you may have had interact with your content. And so put yourself out there. In the same form that I talk about feedback, it doesn't have to be 100% right. It's your perspective. And the more that you practice it, the more confident that you become in these things, and you develop your own flavor that somebody's going to see.
Well, I guess that's a good final word. Well, thank you so much for being with us, Harrison.